Your overhead story channel. Enjoy.
I got home earlier than planned from a business conference in Phoenix. The final presentation wrapped up ahead of schedule, and instead of Ling time in a hotel for another night, I thought it'd be nice to head back. Quiet surprise. No big entrance, no flowers. Just me showing up, ready to take a breath of home. I didn't text or call. I even muted the cab ride from the airport. I had this idea in my head. Maybe I'd find her curled up on the couch watching some reality show I pretended not to like. Maybe we'd order Thai, sit close, talk about nothing. I've been missing that. But as soon as I stepped through the front door, the air hit different. The house wasn't empty, but it didn't feel lived in either. It was quiet, too quiet, not the peaceful kind. The kind of silence that holds its breath. I closed the door behind me slowly. My suitcase bumped the hardwood, and the echo rang longer than it should have. "Hello," I called out, half expecting her to come jogging down the stairs with a surprised grin. But no answer, not even the sound of feet moving. The living room light was off. The couch was tidy, too tidy. Usually she'd leave a throw blanket in a pile or a half-finished LaCroix on the coffee table. Tonight, nothing. I walked into the kitchen, expecting to find some sign of life. And I did. Just not the kind I wanted. On the counter sat a coffee mug I'd never seen before. Red and white, bold letters wrapping around the ceramic. Boston Red Sox. I stopped and stared at it like it might explain itself. I picked it up instinctively, still warm. Let me be clear. I grew up a Yankees fan. My dad used to joke it was the only religion he ever passed down. And she knew that. When we first started dating, she even teased me about it, pretending to root for Boston just to get under my skin. But that mug wasn't a joke. And it had never been here before. Not once. Next to the sink, a spoon rested on a paper towel, coffee drips drying into little brown constellations. Someone had just used it. Not long ago. I turned around, feeling my chest tighten for no good reason. That's when I saw it. Draped over one of the dining chairs, casual as Sunday laundry, was a men's button-down shirt. Pale blue, thin white stripes, cuffs unbuttoned. It wasn't mine, and it didn't belong here. I reached out and touched the fabric like it might change under my fingers. It smelled faintly of cologne I didn't recognize, sharp, synthetic. Not mine, not hers. Something inside me started rearranging itself. I stood there for a few seconds, listening. I could hear movement upstairs, water running. The shower, maybe. It shut off a moment later, followed by the creak of the bathroom door. She came down a few seconds later, wrapped in a bathrobe like she was getting ready for a night in. Her hair was damp, darkened at the ends, clinging to her shoulders. She didn't flinch when she saw me, didn't look startled, just raised her eyebrows like I was the one who had interrupted something mundane. "You're back early," she said with a calm smile. Nothing in her tone registered surprise. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Conference ended a little ahead of schedule. Figured I'd catch the earlier flight. She nodded, her eyes landing on the mug. "Oh, that," she said quickly. "It's just a work thing. One of the guys from the Chicago office brought those mugs to hand out during the retreat. I didn't even notice I'd brought one home." My eyes didn't leave hers. "And the shirt." She blinked once. Only once. And then glanced at the shirt like it was just another misplaced object. "Oh, right. Weird story. I think there was a mix-up with a package from the laundry service. I opened it and found that. I meant to call them." Her answers came too easy. Not panicked, not flustered. She was prepared. And not just the words, but the way she delivered them. Measured, calm. Like she'd said them to herself in the mirror already. Like she'd practiced for this moment. Her face didn't give anything away, but her eyes. Her eyes didn't look at me like they used to. There was no warmth in them. No curiosity. Just calculation. She wasn't defensive. She was on script. I didn't say anything else. I just stood there for a few seconds, nodding, letting it sink in. Not just the shirt or the mug, but the performance. That's what hit me hardest. It wasn't shock or guilt I saw in her. It was control, composure. She didn't ask how the conference was. Didn't ask why I came back early. She pivoted, redirected, turned her back and walked to the fridge. "Do you want anything?" she asked, casual again, like we were back to normal. "I was going to make a salad. There's that ginger dressing you like." It was then I understood what this moment really was. It wasn't confusion or misunderstanding. It was a test. One of those moments that quietly divides life into a before and after. The world doesn't collapse loudly. It slips away in small pieces. I didn't confront her. Didn't accuse. What was I going to say? That a Red Sox mug broke my trust? That a shirt on a chair made me feel like I didn't know my own house? Instead, I said, "Sure. Salad sounds good." I sat at the counter while she moved around the kitchen, humming softly to herself. A song she always hummed when she wanted to seem relaxed. It used to calm me. Tonight it made my skin crawl. She placed the plates down. Chopped cucumber, cherry tomatoes, sprinkled feta like it was any other night. And maybe for her it was. We ate in silence. I chewed and swallowed, tasted nothing. After dinner, she rinsed her plate and kissed me on the cheek. "I'm going to dry my hair," she said. "Okay," I replied, and watched her walk upstairs like nothing in our lives had just cracked open. I sat at the table long after she was gone, staring at the empty plate in front of me, and something in me broke quietly. Not all at once, just enough to notice. That night, I lay next to her in bed, her back turned, her breathing slow and steady like nothing had changed. But something had. Something had shifted in the foundation, and I wasn't sure it could be fixed. And she didn't even know she'd lost me yet. After that night with the mug and the shirt, everything in me went quiet. Not outwardly. Outwardly I still smiled, nodded, poured coffee in the mornings, and asked her about her schedule. But inside, I'd gone completely still, like someone holding their breath under dark water, waiting to see if a shadow swims by. The truth is, I started seeing things I should have seen earlier. Not because they weren't obvious, but because I'd trained myself not to question them. When you love someone or think you do, you develop this dangerous sk*ll of rationalizing, of rewriting reality in real time just to preserve the peace. I used to think that made me supportive. Now I'm not so sure it didn't just make me easy to lie to. It started with her schedule. That used to be something we shared, honestly. She'd leave her calendar open on the kitchen tablet, add little notes, client lunches, team meetings, deadlines, errands. It was part of our rhythm. But somewhere along the way that stopped. When I asked why I didn't see her late meetings anymore, she said she'd moved over to a private app the office used. Claimed it was mandatory for security reasons. I bought it. Why wouldn't I? Except then I'd see her glance at her phone during dinner, tap the screen quickly, and put it face down. I started noticing patterns. Certain nights of the week she always had strategy sessions or vendor calls. But when I asked how they went, the details were fuzzy. Always fine. Always productive. Never more than that. Then came the phone calls she only took in the car or out on the balcony. Sometimes I'd hear her laugh. A little too loud. A little too free. She'd come back inside like nothing had happened. Like the conversation hadn't pulled her into some other world I wasn't invited into. The biggest red flag? She started getting new clothes I never saw her wear at home. I'd see them on her social media, photos from work events or girl nights. Tight dresses, low backs, heels that weren't made for walking, and makeup that only ever appeared in filtered, grainy snaps with hashtags like #justice or #workhardplayhard. I'd scroll through the comments, read replies from coworkers I didn't know well, fire emojis, inside jokes, flirty replies. And there she'd be in the middle of it, smiling in a way that felt too familiar and too distant at the same time. I remember one post in particular, a mirror selfie in a hotel room. She stood in front of a full-length mirror wearing a black dress I'd never seen, hand on her hip. The caption was something vague like, "Long day, worth it." At first, I didn't think much of it. But weeks later, when I was going through my phone to find a receipt from the same weekend, I noticed something strange. In the corner of her mirror's reflection, barely visible in the blurred background, there was a second pair of shoes. Men's dress shoes, facing the bed. I stared at that photo longer than I should have. Zoomed in, zoomed out, asked myself if it was just my imagination. But deep down I knew. I knew even then. And I told myself some ridiculous excuse. Maybe she'd ordered room service and the bellhop had walked in. Maybe someone else was in the room briefly for a meeting. I lied to myself harder than she ever needed to. Another time I noticed something else. We shared a car. Nothing fancy, just a mid-size SUV we leased together. We'd alternate who drove it, depending on who had meetings or errands. But I started picking up scents in the car that weren't ours. Not cologne exactly, not like a full-on fragrance, but something musky, like deodorant, like someone had been sitting in the driver's seat a little too long. One day I found a receipt in the cup holder. A brunch place I'd never been to, 2 entrees, mimosas, dated on a Sunday when she'd said she was seeing her sister. I almost laughed. It was so cliché I thought maybe I was making it up. Maybe she got breakfast with a friend. Maybe her sister ordered 2 things. Maybe, but no. I wasn't stupid. Just slow. There were also the spa days and yoga weekends that came out of nowhere. She started signing up for retreats and workshops and detox programs. Some of them last minute, none of them cheap. She'd bring back gift bags with herbal teas and essential oils. Tell me stories about breathing workshops and guided silence. But what I remember most is how detached she seemed afterward. Not refreshed, distant. Like she'd been somewhere else emotionally and had to recalibrate to be around me again. I convinced myself it was healthy. Self-care, I called it. Good for her mental health. I even told a friend once that I was proud of her for taking that time for herself. Now I look back and wonder how many of those weekends were just dress rehearsals. Practice runs for sneaking away, staying gone, and then returning with just enough calm to mask the drift. Even her language changed. She used to say we when she made plans. We should do dinner this weekend. We haven't been to the coast in a while. But slowly it shifted. I have a lot coming up. I might be gone Friday. I've got plans. That we was shrinking. And it wasn't just about me, it was everything. She started describing our life as if it were a job she hadn't yet quit. Detached, observational. She'd mention our anniversary like it was an appointment she hadn't decided whether to keep. One night I asked if she wanted to go back to the cabin we'd stayed at the year before, and she said, I'm not sure where I'll be that week. Where she'd be. That sentence haunted me. There were also things she stopped doing. Subtle absences. She stopped texting me during the day just to say hi. No more little memes or inside jokes. She used to send selfies on bad hair days or complain about her coworkers in long, hilarious rants. That all faded. I'd text her, and sometimes she'd reply hours later with one-word answers. Busy. Later. Yep. I started noticing that when I told her about my day, she'd tune out. Pretend to listen, but her eyes would glaze over. Or worse, she'd interrupt with something completely unrelated. It was like talking to someone on delay. As if my voice had to travel across a time zone just to reach her. Looking back now, it all seems so painfully obvious. But when you're inside it, when the love is still lingering, when the routine is still moving forward, it's easy to mistake erosion for evolution. You think relationships change, that people shift, that this is just a phase. But sometimes it's not a phase. Sometimes it's the quiet dismantling of everything you built, one invisible crack at a time. I started keeping a journal, not because I wanted to catch her, but because I didn't trust my own memory anymore. I'd write down little things, timestamps, moments, odd phrasing. I needed something to anchor me, because her version of events always sounded more believable than mine. She had a way of bending the narrative gently so it never quite snapped, like steam smoothing out truth. Once I brought up the Red Sox mug again weeks after the fact, just casually. Oh, that? She said with a shrug. Didn't I tell you? I gave it to the neighbor's kid. He's a big fan. I nodded, but I remember thinking that's not what you said the first time. That was the moment I realized how much of our life depended on my willingness to forget. To accept version after version of her stories without pushing back. She didn't need to lie well. She just needed me to not follow the thread. And I didn't. Until I did. Until all those signs. Those small, quiet betrayals finally lined up into something I couldn't unsee. It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary in every visible way. The sky was gray with a chance of drizzle, the kind of weather that made coffee feel mandatory and traffic feel personal. She'd already left the house for her team strategy breakfast, which I knew by now was probably code for something else, but I didn't say anything. I poured my own cup, sat at the counter, and stared at nothing for a while. I had a meeting scheduled later that day and needed to print a contract. My laptop was acting up, some Bluetooth issue or something, and hers was already open on the dining table, screen glowing like an invitation. I hesitated. To this day, I'm not sure what exactly I was expecting to find. Maybe I was hoping for reassurance, some email from a coworker about actual work, something that proved she was where she said she was, that I was just paranoid, that this was all in my head, fueled by a growing collection of doubts and shadows. But if I'm honest, deep down, I knew I wasn't reaching for comfort. I was reaching for confirmation. Her inbox was open. She hadn't even bothered to log out. At the top was an unread email. Subject line, "Finally alone." My stomach sank. I clicked on it, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The body of the message wasn't long. Just a few lines. This weekend meant everything. You, me, the sound of nothing around us but the waves and our own breath. I've never felt clearer, like I'm stepping into my real life for the first time. No pretending, just us. I've never wanted anything more. There was an attachment, a photo. I opened it. It was a sh*T from a hotel balcony. Evening light, two figures wrapped together in silhouette. Her head resting on someone's shoulder. Bare feet, wine glass balanced on the railing. His arm around her waist. It was her. And it was not me. I looked at the date. It was from the same weekend she told me she had a regional training event in Asheville. She had left Friday morning with a suitcase and a kiss on the cheek. She came back Sunday evening smelling like lavender lotion and excuses. I remember asking how the sessions went. She said they were intense but inspiring. She had told me she'd be too tired for dinner that night. I ordered takeout and sat alone watching reruns. I closed the email, then reopened it. I read it again, slower this time. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I just stopped, like a movie freezing halfway through a scene. My eyes were locked on the screen, but I wasn't reading anymore. I was listening to the sound of something inside me snapping in a way that didn't make noise but somehow echoed. For months, I'd been collecting suspicions like stones in my pockets, feeling the weight increase little by little. This was the moment I sank. I clicked over to her sent folder. I wasn't prepared for what I found. Dozens of messages. Some casual, some flirty, some coded, others careless. Most from a separate email address I didn't recognize at first glance. But the tone was unmistakable. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Plans that had nothing to do with me. Conversations that spanned weeks. Talks about weekends, wine, meetings, hiding places. They had names for each other. Not cutesy ones. *mate ones. Ones that hinted at a version of her I'd never met. There were attachments too. More photos. One of her sitting on the edge of a hotel bed in a robe, hair up, smiling at the camera. Another of her feet buried in sand beside a pair of men's shoes. A **T of their drinks, 2 straws, 1 glass. In one email, she wrote, "Every time I come back, I feel more hollow, like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. It's getting harder to fake it. I don't know how much longer I can do this." She was talking about me. I didn't touch anything else after that. I didn't copy the emails. Didn't print them. I just sat there, laptop humming quietly beneath my palms, watching the last few remaining threads of denial fall apart. There's this strange moment when betrayal stops being a theory and becomes a fact. Your brain does this lurch like a train jumping tracks. You can't go back to guessing. You can't retreat into maybe. You're no longer imagining things. You're staring at them. And oddly, there was relief in it. Cold, empty relief, but still relief. Like finally being able to exhale after holding your breath for too long, even if what you're breathing in is smoke. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I didn't scream or throw anything. I just closed the laptop, placed it exactly where it had been, and stood in the quiet kitchen with the taste of ash in my throat. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of our bed. The same bed where we used to fall asleep holding hands. The same bed where she told me about her promotion. The same bed she must have returned to after those weekends away. Still smelling like someone else and pretending not to. I looked around the room and saw it differently. The framed photos. The wedding album tucked on the shelf. The little clay dish where she kept earrings and hair ties. It all felt like a museum now, artifacts from a life I no longer belonged to. What broke me wasn't the infidelity itself. It was the ease with which she did it. The routine. The lack of hesitation. The rehearsed nature of it all. She didn't trip and fall into this. She built it, protected it, nurtured it, while letting our marriage rot from the inside. And all this time I was the one making the excuses, telling myself to be patient, to trust, to give her space. I was loyal to the version of her that didn't exist anymore. Maybe never did. I went for a drive. No destination, just movement. I needed the car to carry me somewhere my mind couldn't follow. I ended up at a small overlook about 30 minutes out of town. It was empty, gray, and windy. I got out, stood by the railing, and stared into the distance like answers might be hiding in the tree line. I didn't cry. I think that's what surprised me most. Not then, at least. I was too far beyond sadness. What I felt was something deeper, like the emotional equivalent of frostbite. Numbness that went all the way to the bone. Eventually, I got back in the car and drove home. She was back by then. Kitchen lights on. Music playing softly. Something acoustic. The scent of soup on the stove. She looked up when I walked in. "Hey," she said, smiling like it was just another Tuesday. "I thought you had meetings all day?" I nodded slowly. "They wrapped up early." She walked over, kissed my cheek. "Well, good. I was thinking we could do a movie tonight. Something light. You pick." Her tone was chipper, practiced, not a crack in sight. I looked at her for a long second, just looked, and I realized in that moment, she wasn't going to confess, ever. If I hadn't opened that laptop, she would have kept lying. For another day, another week, maybe another year, maybe forever. That was the last night I ever looked at her the same way. I didn't leave. I didn't scream or throw the laptop or demand answers. That surprised even me. If someone had told me years ago that my marriage would unravel like this, I would have imagined myself storming out, voice raised, rage spilling out in all directions. But when the moment finally came, there was no dramatic collapse. Just clarity. And clarity doesn't yell. Plans. That night, I lay next to her in silence. She curled up under the comforter and mumbled something about how cold the sheets were. I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, wondering how long she'd been able to fall asleep beside me with someone else still on her mind. And then I started organizing thoughts the way I used to organize reports. Methodically, logically, with as little emotion as possible. If she was playing a long game, I'd play a longer one. The next morning, she left early for a marketing breakfast, and I started my own list of appointments. The first was a quiet meeting with a financial strategist, a guy named Richard, recommended by a client I trusted. We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over. He had a calm demeanor and a discreet smile. I told him I wanted to restructure things preemptively, in case of future changes. I didn't say the word divorce. He didn't ask. He just nodded like he'd heard that kind of preamble before. We started with the real estate. The house wasn't in both of our names. Something we had agreed on early in the marriage because I had better credit and she didn't care about paperwork. It was the only reason this would work. Richard had connections, and within weeks, he helped me quietly place the property into a newly established trust, owned and managed by a neutral third-party firm. On the outside, nothing had changed. On paper, the house was now owned by something she couldn't touch. Then came the car. Our SUV was still under a lease agreement. I paid it off in full and retitled it under the business LLC I had used for freelance consulting. She noticed that one, but I brushed it off casually. Something about writing off mileage, taxes, whatever. She nodded like she understood, but I could see a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. The investment accounts took longer. We had a few joint portfolios, nothing massive, but enough to matter. I didn't drain them. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I had my half quietly moved into a new brokerage account under a newly formed LLC in another state. Same funds, same names, just different control. Every withdrawal, transfer, and signature was logged, dated, and notarized. I kept everything in a private drive, password protected, backed up twice. At home, I remained perfectly calm. I made coffee in the mornings. I asked about her meetings. I even suggested a weekend trip, just a short one. She declined, said she had client deadlines. I nodded, kissed her on the cheek, and smiled like nothing had changed. She had no idea I was already halfway out the door. Emotionally, I had detached. I don't think she noticed. She was used to me being steady, maybe even a little boring. So my quiet demeanor didn't register as unusual. If anything, she seemed relieved, like the less I said, the more space she had to keep doing what she was doing. But every quiet moment became a calculation. I started logging more than just financials. I documented patterns, late-night messages, excuses, her movements. Not because I wanted to use it as ammunition. I had no desire to destroy her. I just wanted insulation. I wanted proof that I wasn't crazy. Because when someone lies long enough, you start doubting your own memory. There's something about betrayal that sharpens your mind. You stop sleepwalking. You start noticing every detail. You remember where the keys were left, how long the shower ran, whether her phone stayed face up or face down. You catalog every sentence, every inconsistency, every time she says she's one place and her tagged photo says she was somewhere else. She made it easy, honestly. People who think they're untouchable stop being careful. She got sloppy. One night, she left her iPad unlocked on the kitchen island. I didn't touch it. I just glanced at the screen long enough to see a name pop up I didn't recognize. Just a first name, no last. The message read, "Miss you already. Wish I was falling asleep next to you." She came in a minute later, scooped up the iPad, and pretended nothing happened. I didn't say a word, just smiled and went back to chopping vegetables. Inside, though, something tightened. Not rage, just confirmation. A steady drumbeat that said, "Keep going. You're almost there." I became an actor in my own home. My performance was flawless. She never suspected I knew. Never once questioned the friendly tone in my voice, or the way I'd casually ask about her retreats. I even offered to help her pack one night before she left for a weekend conference. She waved me off and said I always overfolded her clothes. "Too perfect," she said with a smirk. "They come out looking ironed." I laughed. I didn't tell her I already knew where she was going, that I'd checked the event schedule for the so-called conference and found nothing with her name on it. No sign-ins, no attendance lists, no record of the company even being there that weekend. What I did find was a reservation under her name for a boutique hotel 2 hours south, with 2 guests on the reservation. I **Ted everything, forwarded it to myself, archived it in a hidden folder. She called me twice that weekend, once in the morning and once in the evening. Both calls were short, her voice breezy and distracted. I could hear seagulls in the background, which was odd considering the conference was supposedly in a downtown hotel. I didn't mention it. When she got back, she brought me a souvenir mug with the hotel's logo on it. "Cute, right?" she said. "Thought you'd like it for your collection." I smiled and said, "Thanks." She put it on the shelf beside the others. She never noticed that later that night, I took it down and placed it in a box I'd started keeping in the attic. A quiet archive of all the things I no longer believed in. By that point, I had stopped imagining confrontation. I didn't want to scream or expose her. I didn't even want her to feel what I had felt. I wasn't after revenge. I wanted insulation, clean exits, no mess, no pleading, no arguments. I wanted her to one day realize the floor had disappeared from under her, and never saw it coming. I kept smiling through it all. I kept asking about her coworkers, her deadlines, her new yoga studio. I brought home groceries, cooked dinner. She complimented the food. Said I was being really thoughtful lately. I almost laughed. She had no idea she was dining with a ghost version of me. One that was slowly erasing any trace of vulnerability. There's a kind of power in stillness. When you stop needing someone to admit their betrayal, you reclaim control. I didn't need her confession anymore. I had evidence. I had dates, emails, timestamps, photos, and patterns. I had all the answers I needed, and none of the emotion she might have expected. It's strange how steady you can feel when the worst has already happened. Once you stop trying to save something, you can start preparing for what comes after. And that's what I was doing. Every day, every smile, every calm exchange. I was building a fireproof wall between my future and her wreckage. She just didn't know it yet. There's a particular kind of smugness that people wear when they think they've gotten away with something. Not relief, not guilt. Smugness. The smugness of someone who believes the story they fabricated has now become the truth, not just to others but to themselves. She wore that look to the company dinner. It was a Friday night event, hosted by her firm to celebrate Q2 wins, or some generic milestone no one really cared about. I'd been to a few of these over the years. Stiff appetizers, awkward small talk, wine that tastes expensive but isn't. In the past, she'd beg me to come. This year, I wasn't even invited. She mentioned it offhandedly over breakfast the day before. "Oh, by the way," she said while scrolling through her phone, "we've got that quarterly dinner tomorrow night. It's mostly just the leadership team and clients, kind of boring." I nodded. "You want me to come?" She hesitated for exactly 1 second too long, then smiled. "Nah, it's really more of a networking thing this time. I'll be home late, but don't wait up." I said okay, but I went anyway, not as a guest. I didn't walk in through the front doors or shake hands or ask for a name tag. I wore a jacket that wasn't too formal, kept my distance, and watched the event unfold from the bar across the atrium. They held the dinner in one of those glass-walled conference spaces with high ceilings and dramatic lighting. Fancy without being warm. I ordered club soda and sat at a table facing the event space, half shielded by a row of decorative plants. I watched her through the glass like a scene playing out on mute. She arrived fashionably late, of course. That had become her thing lately, entering a room as if time bent around her. She wore a sleek black dress, low-cut, tight at the waist, paired with heels I hadn't seen before. Her hair was curled, makeup perfect. She looked radiant, and completely untethered from me. As she mingled, she radiated confidence, laughing too loudly, touching arms, leaning into conversations like she was the center of a story no one else knew the ending to. I watched her raise a glass during a toast, nod thoughtfully during a presentation, then laugh, really laugh, with a group that included a man I recognized. Him. The silhouette from the hotel photo. The one from the emails. He stood beside her like a prop in a play, smiling when she spoke, mirroring her body language like he'd been trained to. I watched as she reached out and touched his sleeve mid-sentence. The gesture was casual but familiar. Int asterisk mate. She tossed her head back at something he said, her eyes sparkling. From across the room, they looked like a couple everyone assumed had been together for years. And then, she started talking about me. I couldn't hear the words, but I could tell. Her posture shifted. The circle leaned in. She made a dramatic gesture with her hand, palm up, as if presenting something obsolete. She rolled her eyes and smirked, and the group burst into polite laughter. My name didn't need to be said. I knew the tone. I'd heard it once before at a party years ago when someone described an ex as safe but boring. I'd watched her give the same laugh then. She was painting me as an anchor, a quiet husband at home, someone too routine, too grounded to keep up, a relic from a life she had outgrown. And they laughed with her. What she didn't know, what not a single person in that room knew, was that hours before she arrived in that dress, her accountant had finalized a financial summary that would soon be delivered to her office. The contents? 2 of her primary accounts frozen. A pending action filed with the trustee holding her share of our joint assets. Revocation of access to the investment accounts. And a legal notification informing her that the deed to the lake property she'd been eyeing for renovations had been quietly reassigned and transferred. In plain terms, while she was laughing at my expense, her financial foundation was already slipping out from under her. I didn't toast to that. I didn't smile. I just sat there quietly, watching the performance and thinking, you really think you're the storm, but you don't even know the flood's already come and gone. After the event, I stayed at the bar, watched her leave with the same man. Not hand in hand, too obvious, but with the timing of people practiced in not being caught. He walked ahead. She followed 5 minutes later. Separate cars. Opposite exits. Textbook. I let them go. On the drive home, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. If anything, I felt hollow, like someone who had just witnessed the burning of a house they helped build. But I didn't stop the fire, because it needed to burn. She got home around 2 a.m. Her heels clacked against the hardwood as she came through the door. I pretended to be asleep. She tiptoed into the bathroom, probably checking her reflection, then slid into bed beside me. I felt her hair brush my shoulder as she settled in. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just listened to her breathing slow as she drifted off. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. Made coffee, scrolled through her phone, told me how long and exhausting the night had been. I'm just glad it's over, she said, pouring almond milk into her cup. You didn't miss much. I smiled. Yeah, those work events can be a drag. She nodded, relieved I hadn't asked too many questions. She always preferred it when I didn't pry. Made the lying easier. Around noon, she got the email. I was upstairs, sorting paperwork, when I heard her voice from the kitchen. What the hell? Her tone cracked slightly, then footsteps. Fast. She came to the bottom of the stairs, holding her phone like it had betrayed her. Did you know anything about this? She asked, waving the screen. My bank's saying there's a freeze on one of my accounts. And something about the lake property paperwork being voided? I looked down at her from the landing. You should talk to your lawyer. Or your accountant. She blinked. Wait. What's going on? I shrugged. I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. She stood there, blinking, waiting for the moment to make sense. But it wouldn't, because the moment was no longer hers to control. She walked away, not up the stairs, not out the front door, just into another room. I could hear drawers opening, her pacing, the anxious shuffle of someone who had just realized the rules of the game had changed, and no one had told her. The rest of the day was quiet. She didn't speak to me again until dinner,